Hi, everyone. It's 10 o'clock, time to get started. I'm Nancy Langton, Associate Dean of Accreditation and Strategic Initiatives at the Lewis College of Business and the Brad D. Smith Schools of Business at Marshall University. I'm excited to be with you today. Welcome to the HERD 2020 Insights Small Business Webinar Series. We thank you for taking the time to attend this event. This is the fifth in a series of webinars given by the college with the goal of helping the local economy and its small businesses emerge from the COVID-19 crisis. Today we have a special event in store. It is titled The Post-Pandemic Future of Work, Perspectives on the Economy, Businesses, and Individuals. It features Brad D. Smith, Executive Chairman and former President and CEO of Intuit, in conversation with Dr. Avi Mukherjee, Dean of the AACSB accredited Lewis College of Business and Brad D. Smith Schools of Business, and Professor of Marketing at Marshall University since 2017. Dean Avi will set the stage for some intriguing and on-point discussions about how the pandemic has affected the world as we know it. Brad will provide his perspectives on how to grow and move forward throughout this time of crisis. After the discussion, they will answer questions from the audience. Before we start the event today, I would like to say a few words about the Lewis College of Business and its mission, which is to promote economic development in the regional community and beyond. The college does this through 5 strategic priorities, including high demand curricula, leadership skill sets, experiential learning, external engagement and economic development, entrepreneurship and innovation, and a global footprint. The college is committed to supporting local businesses, our alumni, and other stakeholders in re-engaging, recharging, and redesigning their business models. In keeping with this commitment, we have developed this webinar series that will continue into the fall. We hope you enjoy today's presentation and use it to make yourself and your business more successful as we emerge from the COVID-19 crisis. I will now turn the presentation over to Dean Avi, who will introduce Brad D. Smith and begin the panel discussion.
Thank you, Nancy, and welcome everyone. I'm proud to introduce our illustrious son of Marshall, Brad D. Smith, as today's featured speaker. Brad, as you know, is the former CEO of Intuit and co-founder of the Wing to Wing Foundation. He currently serves as Intuit's executive chairman of the board of directors and is chairman of Nordstrom's board of directors and a sitting member of the board of directors of SurveyMonkey. Brad D. Smith led Intuit's transformation from a North American desktop software company to a global cloud-based product and platform company, proving himself as a leader capable of the necessary flexibility to thrive in today's tech landscape. By the conclusion of Brad's 11-year tenure as Intuit CEO, he nearly doubled the company's revenue and increased its stock price more than 500%, while accumulating a robust list of annual Best Places to Work awards and accolades. In 2018, Brad Smith announced that he was leaving his CEO role at Intuit. Shortly after, he co-founded the Wing to Wing Foundation with his wife, Elise Smith. The organization's goal is to advance the great equalizers of education and entrepreneurship in regions where individuals and communities have been overlooked and underserved. In doing so, they strive to champion human dignity and unleash human potential. Brad D. Smith received his BA in marketing from Marshall University in 1986, followed by his MA in leadership development from Aquinas College in 1991. He currently resides in Menlo Park, California. The transformative gift of $25 million from Brad and Elise in 2018 laid the foundation for the reimagination of our academic curriculum, the creation of the Brad D. Smith Undergraduate School of Business and the Brad D. Smith Graduate School of Business, and the construction of a new academic building for our business school called the Brad D. Smith Center for Business and Innovation. As President Gilbert tweeted today, it's the first day of a very unusual semester at Marshall as we start the new academic year. But what better way could we ring the opening bell on the new academic year than to have you, Brad, with us discussing how the world of business looks like during and after the pandemic. Thank you, Brad, for joining us today. How have you been doing during the pandemic?
Well, first of all, Avi, thank you for that kind introduction. And for all of you who've been around and have seen me, I prefer Brad from Canova. That says it all. And I think that actually sets the bar high for me to try to live up to every day. In terms of your question, like every other family, we're adjusting. I think we're taking pride in the fact that we're adaptable. We have more quality time with each other. We're having to learn different ways to do things, whether it's order online and curbside pickup or figure out distance learning. But we're resilient, and I hope you and your family and everyone out there on this webcast are doing well also.
Thank you, Brad. Yes, we are all going through a whole new way of living, but I think hopefully for the better as we move forward. We are going to talk today about the post-pandemic future of work. And the way we are designing it is we are going to divide the discussion into 3 levels of aggregation. We will first talk about the effect of the pandemic on the economy as a whole. Then we will come down to the effect on businesses and eventually the effect on consumers and individuals. So let me start by first painting a broad canvas of the macroeconomic trends and fundamentals, and then we will hear your take on these. It almost sounds like The Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, right? It's the best of times, it's the worst of times. Last Tuesday, August 18th, the S&P 500 rose to 3,389.78, eclipsing its previous February 19 high to finish at the highest closing level on record. This means this year's bear market, or drop of more than 20% from the peak, from the February high to the lows on March 23, was the shortest in history, according to S&P Dow Jones indices. The NASDAQ Composite crossed the 10,000 mark for the first time in June, fueled by the strong tech sector growth during the pandemic. Apple added $1 trillion in market value in the past 21 weeks, becoming the first American public company with a market cap of $2 trillion. Additionally, while retirement accounts saw sharp swings in the second quarter due to uncertainty surrounding the pandemic, investors boosted their IRA contributions, driving record-breaking flows to retail retirement accounts, while contributions to 401k plans remained steady, according to Fidelity Investments. So there is this sort of positive side of what's going on in the Wall Street, but there is also the other side of the economy, right? While the stock markets are roaring, the virus is still raging, approaching 5.5 million cases and 175,000 deaths in the US alone. Millions of out-of-work Americans are still suffering, with a mind-boggling 57.4 million workers seeking unemployment aid in just the 21 weeks since mid-March. The number of Americans seeking initial weekly jobless benefit claims has been hovering around the 1 million mark. It dropped to 963,000 for the week ending August 8, falling just below the 1 million mark for the first time since the shutdown began in the spring, but rose back to 1.1 million last week, according to the Labor Department. These numbers far surpasses the peak of 665,000 in March 2009 in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, and crossed a previous record of 695,000 in October 1982 during another economic downturn. Job creation has recovered in recent months, but layoffs remain historically high, with about 13 million jobs lost during the pandemic. The unemployment rate stood at 10.2% in July, compared with a pre-pandemic jobless rate of 3.5% in February, the lowest in a half century. Federal aid is drying out as the next relief is being negotiated. Some sectors have benefited from the pandemic while others have languished. Economic pundits have actually started debating the letter best describing a potential economic recovery. Is it an L-shaped recovery? Is it a W-shaped recovery, a U-shaped recovery, V-shaped, and so on and so forth. So, with all these conflicting signals in the broader economy, Brad, what does a manager or an entrepreneur take out of all this? How would you unbundle this?
Well, first, Avi, I think your opening part of the question says it all. It is a tale of two cities. Whether it's the impact of the pandemic or the road to recovery, it has been and will continue to be an uneven playing field. We can see the pandemic had a huge impact on different demographic groups, different geographic regions, different types and sizes of businesses, and different industries in certain ways, and in others, they actually flourished. And if you look at the road to recovery, it's also the haves and the have-nots. Wall Street is having a boom, as you described. Main Street is back on its heels, if not flat on its back. And even inside of Wall Street, you have certain companies that are succeeding, digital companies, companies that were deemed essential by the US government, While on the other side of the equation, you have people who've declared bankruptcy, they've closed their doors, or they've had to downsize significantly. So it is absolutely a tale of two cities right now. And if I step back and ask the question of what's the recovery look like, all of us in West Virginia are used to having sayings, and one that my grandfather used to say is, "He who lives with a crystal ball often ends up eating a lot of ground glass." So I'm not going to try to predict the future, but I will tell you I have the opportunity to sit in business councils, roundtables, and with thought leaders around the globe. And what I'm hearing right now is ultimately it is going to be dependent upon when the vaccine has been discovered, produced, and mass distributed. And depending upon the most optimistic of those scenarios, when you put all three together, most are coalescing around the fact it's going to be midsummer 2021. So if I had any advice for any business owner or an entrepreneur out there, the first would get your game plan in place to know that what we're existing with right now is probably going to feel like this for at least another 12 months. But then secondly, it's not going to go back to the way it was. There's a whole lot of insights that we'll talk about in today's discussion where consumer behavior, business expectations, and supply chains will be fundamentally changed for the rest of our existence. So come back prepared to be a newer, better, and different version of who your company was before you went into the pandemic.
Yeah, these are definitely redefining times, and that's a great start to your your unbundling of these issues. Let's talk about tech, because you mentioned that. What do you see as the future of work in terms of working from home? Some companies are promoting it. I today saw on the news in the morning that a couple of companies are asking their employees to try to come back, but most companies, I guess, are going to do working from home. Is this going to be the trend for long? And what is the role of tech companies in the post-pandemic recovery?
Well, I will start first with the role of tech companies in the post-pandemic recovery, and then I'll segue to the question you asked about remote work and any other changes. First of all, it's important to realize if you study every market disruption back hundreds of years, they typically accelerate the secular trends that were already in place before the disruption. And a disruption could be Y2K, it could be 9/11, it could be the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, it could be the pandemic. And ultimately, what you see before the pandemic is we were moving to a digital first world. We were operating with a lot of data in the cloud, connected with devices in the palm of our hand, on our wristwatches with Apple Watch or Fitbit, the command of our voice with Siri, Alexa, or Cortana. And basically, a lot of individuals before the pandemic had not adopted those as the way to live their everyday life. And then shelter in place happened. And it forced people to try things they hadn't done before. Order online, curbside pickup, the ability to collaborate with family members, friends, or business partners through Zoom, the opportunities to step back and ask different ways of shopping. It goes to telemedicine, it goes to distance learning, and the list goes on and on. So I do believe, if you quote one of my friends who's in this business council with me, he said, coming out of this, I don't care if you're a small business owner or a large business owner, every one of us are going to have to be tech CEOs and healthcare CEOs. So that's one reality. And then the second is this pandemic taught all of us quite a few lessons. There's a great quote, bad times followed by good reflection produce great future growth. And many of us were caught flat-footed, and then we discovered that our employees could be effective and productive if we gave them the tools and the access to certain ways of doing business. And so every CEO I'm speaking with right now is revisiting their real estate footprint, revisiting their work from home policy, and going into the pandemic, 23% of the United States workforce was already allowed to work from home. We shared that at the Keith Albee speaker series that we had with you back last year. But now it looks like the numbers are going to be 40 to 50% based upon all the CEOs that I'm speaking with, and some have already declared 100%. So it will be a reality. People will be able to work anywhere they want to work, or at least a large number of them will be, and it's going to be a new way of doing business.
So what effect do you think the country's uncertain economic conditions will have on businesses in terms of surviving, growing, and being able to hire and retain a skilled workforce? And also what will happen to a state like West Virginia, for example, in terms of drawing businesses and workers?
Well, I'll start first with uncertain economic conditions create some benefits and some challenges. The benefits are in terms of retaining a skilled workforce. Most employees are not typically going to go out and look for a new job when the job market's uncertain. So you tend to have the ability to retain your existing employees. At the same time, a lot of companies have had a difficult time. They've closed their doors, they've downsized. There's a lot of talent and skilled workers out there that are looking for a job. So you have an ability in the short term to attract these individuals into your company. So that's the short term. However, if you look at what typically happens, companies that treat their employees as an expense and not an asset struggle to compete when the job market heats back up again. So how you treat your employees during this time, even if you have to make tough decisions, if you treat them with empathy, with dignity, and you assist them in getting their sea legs under them for the next chapter, that will come back to you and benefit you in the long term because they will speak positively about you. Other people want to work for you. So that's sort of the uncertain economic times right now. And we can go deeper into what business owners have to do to try to navigate through this period. Let me quickly touch on West Virginia. I think this is the greatest blessing that we could have ever hoped for. We already knew that digital natives and millennials are seeking to live where they play. They want to have access to the outdoors. They want to have short commutes. They want to have affordable housing. They want to live in communities where people care more about who you are before they care about what you do for a living. And West Virginia is the epitome of that. And I can tell you that as people begin to get the opportunity to work remotely, I think it is a tremendous opportunity for us to invite people to live here in our state, even if they work for Amazon, Microsoft, or others, have their incomes become taxable income for our state. They don't compete for our local jobs because they already have a job. They come in with it. We will then have the ability to take that tax and improve our K through 12 systems, get broadband connectivity, and we can flourish. But we have to be open to the fact that people will come into our state from different cultures. We need to embrace them, accept them as new West Virginians, and really show them why the song says almost heaven. People are going to love to experience what we have experienced our lives.
I totally agree. I think there is a tremendous opportunity for a state like West Virginia to draw businesses and individuals, employees. And I know of your work with the state leadership on this, the Remote West Virginia project. So it's a very exciting time. And people are going to probably discover new ways of working and new places to live along the way. Global commerce is changing. The pandemic has changed supply chains, just the way in which companies manage operations in different countries. What's your take on that? How should a company, should it be more local as opposed to global? Is there a way to manage those risks better? What about the global factor?
Well, it won't be a one-size-fits-all, but it does start with that quote that I shared a few minutes ago: bad times followed by deep and good reflection lead to great future growth. And so if you step back and ask yourself what many companies have discovered, and what I suspect many of the businesses on this webcast have discovered, certain parts of your business model were more vulnerable than you thought. Many supply chains were disrupted. Many partners couldn't be counted on to deliver. Many ways we thought our employees were able to stay productive, we realized they didn't have the tools to be able to do that from home. And so it's time to step back and say, what didn't work as well as we thought? Codify that, and then think about how you're going to make sure that is not an issue going forward. And then the second thing you need to do is to ask you and ask your employees, what is working better than we would have ever imagined? I mean, before this pandemic, we've probably operated a certain way for a long time. And write those things that are working better down as well, and adopt those as the new way of doing business. And what's going to come out of this, Avi, I believe, is a few macro trends. The first is, I think you're going to see certain parts of supply chain become more domestic in their native geographies, whether it's PPE, it's pharmaceuticals, it's certain technology components, it's data centers. I also think you're going to see certain ways of doing business like work from home. It's going to fundamentally change as well. And so you're going to see things like remote work policies and real estate footprints of offices change. But the important thing for a business owner to figure out which is which is you have to ask yourself the question, what must be local? And the emphasis is on must, not my preference. And then what can be distributed and delegated? And then think about that being the new way you'll come back out of the pandemic.
Yeah. So from your discussion with corporate CEOs and top corporate boards and so on, what do you think a local government or a state, for example, could offer businesses during these uncertain economic conditions? What is the role of the economic development bodies to bring the economy back on track?
Yeah, this is not an easy answer, and I don't think it starts with government. I think it starts with public, private, and nonprofit cooperation. It's the collective we, and I've seen a lot of that happening as we look at things like solving for the vaccines or the PPE or some of the other things that have happened through the pandemic. This job is bigger than any one entity, but it does take alignment on what are the critical few things that we have to get right for us to be strong and viable coming out. A pandemic forces good business leaders and good government leaders to edit, to get down to 2 or 3 things, not 20 things, and then to really coalesce around those and say, how do we have the biggest impact on those 2 or 3 things so we collectively can navigate through? Now, if you step back and say, what are those priorities in a pandemic? It's obviously individual health. It's also the ability for us to ensure that displaced workers have the ability to sustain their economic viability while the government is doing what it has to do to keep the public safety. And then the third is to put in place the conditions that allow the economic engine to get started again. And I think those are what has been going on right now. It's been sporadic. I'm disappointed that it's been a little more of a mosaic. But with that being said, I think we're learning our way through this, and we'll take lessons that we learn here, and the next time we'll be wiser and smarter.
Let's turn to businesses. And, let's look at the role of small businesses in our economy today. Obviously, small businesses are the backbone of the American economy. And PPP and other federal support have kept many small businesses from entirely closing or firing all employees. But this is not sustained right now. Things are changing, of course, with regard to federal benefits right now, whether there will be a continuation of the relief or not. On the other hand, companies like Walmart and other big box retailers have announced a very strong second quarter performance. Walmart exceeded expectations by reporting a 97% increase in e-commerce sales. So are large retailers taking businesses away from smaller ones during this pandemic, leading to more consolidation? What should small businesses do to adapt to this new world?
Well, the answer to your first question, are large retailers taking business away from smaller? The answer is yes, but if you read Rudyard Kipling, The Jungle Book, the most famous quote in that book is, it's not the big that eat the small, it's the fast that eat the slow. Small business owners, by definition, are small and nimble, and if they have the ability to learn the lessons of what the big box retailers are doing, think about how they can differentiate, be much more personal, much more localized, and adapt the new ways of doing business, they can outcompete. That's why oftentimes big companies fall because of small disruptors that come in and change the business model on them. So there's no question right now, the playing field was uneven. Some companies were deemed essential, others were forced to shut down. That gave an unfair advantage to certain companies. To their credit, they went in and they found new ways of doing business, keep their employees safe, have curbside pickup. Small businesses need to be stepping back and saying, I'm not going to reopen, I'm going to reimagine. And whether that reimagine is online and physical, or it's some different way of doing business, that is the challenge we all face before us, or the market shares will continue to move in the direction of the companies you see them moving today.
Absolutely. I think you kind of started addressing this, but I wanted to ask a little more about what are some of those innovative strategies that companies are using right now to retain and regain customers and profitability during the pandemic? What are some of the best practices?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've spent a lot of time talking about this as the Business Council. It's the 150 S&P 500 CEOs that get together, and we typically meet 3 times a year, but we've met 18 times since the pandemic. We've been on wartime footing, trying to share best practices, and there are 2 major lessons that have emerged from that. The first is give to get. Give to get. So your first priority is to take care of your customers, and that means give them extended terms, deeper discounts, and in some cases, free services. Now, this is painful for a business owner in the short term because we're struggling as well. But what it does is it builds customer loyalty and retention. It builds positive word of mouth. And we leveraged this exact approach at Intuit in 2008, 2009. And we came out stronger and faster than our peers because our customers remembered our empathy and our willingness to support them through difficult times. And it will come back. You've seen a lot of consumers put GoFundMe pages up for their favorite small business because they care deeply about that business owner's viability. So give to get is the first. And then the second's the theme I was just talking about. Step back and ask yourself, what is the new version of my business that when I reopen, I'm going to retain? How much of this that I've had to do in the pandemic will now be a part of my new business model? And then what things will I be able to go back to in the way I used to, and make that your new business model? And those are the two best practices that people can apply, because you need to keep your customers now, but they're going to come back wanting to shop differently after the pandemic, and you're going to need to serve them differently once the doors are reopened.
You know, a report of a management consulting company recently said that companies have been surprised by the difficulty in getting reliable information and intelligence from different geographies pertaining to the pandemic. And it has been hard for them to really make an effective plan that would fit across states, for example, with a very quick shifting situation of cases and so on. How do you, as a CEO and as a corporate leader, how do you address this problem where things are just shifting on a daily basis, and it shifts not only over time, but across geographies?
Well, I think first of all, we all forget, I think Mike Tyson, the boxer who's now making this comeback, I just think that's amazing and crazy all in one fell swoop. He was famous for saying everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I think we fall into the trap as business leaders and government leaders to trying to predict the future and have a single plan, instead of having a range of scenarios that could happen and a set of leading indicators that let you know which scenario is unfolding, and then execute that plan. So I think it's very important for business leaders and government leaders right now to take the lessons from this pandemic, which is not everything's going to work, but you've got to run multiple experiments. You have to try lots of different things, and then you've got to double down on the ones that are working and shut down the ones that aren't. And I think that is the most important lesson coming out of this, because you're absolutely right. We were caught flat-footed. Information wasn't coming in fast enough. There was a lot of misinformation. And so you have to adopt this design thinking mentality, which you are driving at Marshall. And it's basically living through a world of scenario plans. If we were a football team, we need to pretend that our quarterback right now would be Peyton Manning coming out of retirement, because he changed the play an average of 6 times at the line of scrimmage. He didn't go up with the play he was going to run. He watched to see if the defense shifted left or right, and then he called a different play based upon what he saw in the market. That's the way we need to lead.
And, you know, larger corporations, of course, are probably caught in a wrong foot a little bit more here, because the velocity of the crisis makes it hard to have an effective risk management protocol or a crisis management response team. I mean, the question is exactly the speed, like you were saying. How does a small company versus a larger company respond? I mean, you know, in terms of crisis management, what systems need to be in place?
It's going to sound very commonsensical, but crazy for me, the number of times I sit and talk to business leaders who aren't doing this. Yeah. It starts with leadership. And the most important thing that leaders can do when things are going like they are right now, very unpredictably and many times, you know, very negatively, is increase your communication 3x over what you typically would do if your business was operating in sort of a status quo. That means becoming comfortable speaking to your employees, your vendors, your government officials when you have more questions than answers, and inviting their input and ideas on how we can solve this together. And then basically challenging everyone in your company to have an owner's mindset, to look for ways where we can cut costs, to look for different ways that we can solve or serve customers, and basically be very open with being vulnerable. That is the most important technique right now for a small business owner. Increase the communication 3x, speak to your partners and your employees when you have more questions than answers, and ask everyone to adopt your role as an owner, and ask them to look for new and different ideas that will help us get through this.
That's exactly actually creating that ecosystem and managing the ecosystem, right? Managing partners in the ecosystem well is so critical. Treating the value chain as your business is going to make all the difference, because it's probably not one company that can address it all unless the suppliers and the distributors and the retailers are all on board. So that's exactly what as you are saying, that is a question in a lot of companies' minds, and it's going to be a critical factor as small and large businesses emerge from the crisis.
Yeah.
Let's move on to individuals. And here we are going to talk about, of course, effects on various stakeholders, but let's start with students. And so, you know, when you look at students at Marshall and other universities that are about to graduate or, you know, looking for an internship, and they are facing this industry that is slow and uncertain, what should they do? How do we bring hope back in terms of potential for jobs?
Well, I think first and foremost, I would recommend every student read the book, The Defining Decade, because it's a wonderful book about how important the decisions you make in your 20s will affect your livelihood and your happiness in life throughout the remainder of your life. And in that, you're going to pick up what I'm about to say, which is life's a marathon, not a sprint. This is a moment in time. It is not a pretty moment in time, but it will pass, and we will come out wiser and smarter. So my advice to the students, in addition to reading The Defining Decade, would be, first of all, run to something, not from something. Carefully choose the mission that speaks to your heart and gets you excited about being able to tell friends and family members, this is what I do for a living. The second thing I would say is to ensure you choose the franchise and not the role and the money. What I mean by that is choose a culture that invests in coaching and growing you, gives you a chance to stretch and learn new things, and don't just take the job that pays the most, because that isn't going to produce happiness in the long term. And then the third, I know this is going to sound crazy because I know what it feels like when you don't have a job at the moment that you want, but be patient, be selective. Choosing a job is like choosing a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a mate. You want to make sure that it's something that you can sustain for a long period of time. So now you can't go unemployed, so you do want to find jobs or things that can keep you in the game while you're making that longer term decision to find the kind of job or career you're hoping to pursue. And that's where the book, The Defining Decade, comes up, because it'll give you the kinds of jobs that you should look for that stay consistent with your long-term thing. But that would be my advice, is remember, life's a marathon, not a sprint. It's ominous right now, but the rainbows will come out from between the clouds. Things will be better. And just make sure you're making the right choices so you can take advantage of that when it happens.
There are a lot of people out there who are transitioning between jobs, who are looking for a job right now, and they have already got some experience, but they don't know what the future looks like. Any special advice for them?
I think the advice is similar. Don't run from something, run to something. Have something to go to before you say you're leaving what you have. Many people join a company and quit because of a boss. And you want to make sure that you have a place that you want to go to. So take the time to research, think about what you want to go to. And keep in mind, by the way, coming out of this pandemic, I'd mentioned pandemics and market disruptions accelerate current trends by 3 to 5 years. So think about the skills and the talents that are going to be more in demand in the future. And if you don't have those, take advantage of the current time right now to begin to take a course or go to an online seminar or to read books on it and start to get yourself more accustomed to some of the skills and the capabilities people will be looking for post-pandemic. But again, the storyline that I would have is run to something, not from something, be choiceful and thoughtful, and begin to think about what the skills and capabilities will be as we think about the next 5 to 10 years.
You know, one of the questions a lot of pundits are debating about are the post-pandemic trends for the future of work. And, you know, there are all these things thrown around, right? For example, you know, more emphasis on family. You know, how do people work from home, free time versus work, leisure versus work, individual health situations and how that factors into jobs, age disparities, technological competencies and disparities, flexible scheduling of work. How do individuals and companies prepare for this kind of a future of work, which is very different from what everybody is used to?
Yeah, a lot of time spent talking about this amongst those that I mentioned in the Business Council and in other groups. And there are 4 that I think are going to be fundamental shifts, just as my grandparents lived through the Depression. And up until their last days, they kept money under a mattress or a pillow because they were still had that PTSD from the banks collapsing and their money disappearing. It shaped the way they lived the rest of their lives. And this will shape the way this group lives for the rest of their lives. And so what will we do differently? What will be our version of money under the mattress? The first is going to be, there will be an ongoing trend of virtual collaboration, connecting an individual with an expert, whether it's a student with a professor in distance learning in some form, not 100%, but some option. It's a patient with a doctor with telemedicine. It is you with family members through Zoom or FaceTime. It is all those things. Think about virtual collaboration. That will be a new model that will sustain itself. The second thing that's going to happen is retail will be changed forever. It's not just going to be Amazon. Amazon's looking to build bricks and mortar stores. It's not going to be just bricks and mortar stores. Nordstrom is struggling to make sure that they've got a strong online presence. So it's important to have an omni-channel approach to serving customers and giving them all kinds of varieties. Buy online, buy in store, buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup, home delivery, thinking about that. The third thing that's going to ultimately happen is the way we think about money will be forever changed, just like the Depression. You see digital natives and millennials now adopting things like Robinhood and Acorns and Intuit Mint. They're all trying to think about how can they have a rainy day fund so they never get caught again, hoping that Congress will pass another relief fund to help them pay bills. So people are going to start to become much more financially sort of focused, if not financially responsible. And then the fourth is the social contract between business and society, I think, will change forever. Going into the pandemic, the Business Council had already come up with what they thought a business's role is in society. And it's not just making money and making shareholders happy. They had come out in the winter and said, we need to be good stewards for our employees and their families. We need to be good in the communities in which we do business. We need to take care of the climate in the world. We need to also take care of our shareholders. This pandemic has now shown a light on that. And we are responsible for the mental and physical well-being of our workforce. We're responsible for role modeling what we think is right in the community. We have to be willing to stand up against things that we think are wrong, social inequity issues and other things. It's a very different role for a business leader than it used to be. And that's not going to go back to the old way. So those are four things, sorry to be long-winded, that I think will fundamentally reshape how we need to think as business leaders and, quite frankly, as government leaders.
That's really eye-opening. And, you know, when you look at the sharing economy, I think that's getting expedited right now because a lot more people would like to work as a flexible contract person, you know, working for different companies, doing different things. So I guess the sharing economy trends and platforms are going to grow even further now, given the changes that you are talking about. Let me kind of, you know, I have a set of things and we are coming to an end of that and we'll open up to questions, but I want to end with some questions on leadership. You have been a leader in every sphere of your life. You have been a leader in industry, in business, but also leader for communities and for growth. A recent article by McKinsey says that the coronavirus pandemic has been an epic test of character and determination for millions of people around the world. Nothing compares with the sacrifice of workers on the front lines in hospitals and other essential services. In the business context, CEOs have had to cope with extraordinary demands. For them, the pandemic has been an ultimate leadership test. What do you think are some leadership skills for business leaders and business executives to practice that are especially important during times of crisis and transition back from a crisis?
It's a great question, and it ties to the previous answer. I talked about the role of businesses, the Business Council articulated, and the role of leaders. I'll go back to a quote from Maya Angelou, and I'll paraphrase. She's the famous poet, and she's the one who said, people will not remember what you said. They will not remember what you did, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And so I believe the most important lessons that a leader has during a crisis is to empathize, to edit, and to adapt. Empathize with the employees and their families. Empathize with your customers and what they're going through. Empathize with yourself and your own family, trying to distance learn and help young kids focus on their schoolwork while you're trying to run a business. And cut people a break. The second is edit. To cut them a break, you can't do everything you were doing before you went into this new model. There is science that proves if you have more than 6 priorities, they are no longer causal to your desired outcome. They're correlated and they have a diminishing return on execution. So if you have more than 6 things you're focused on, you're right at the breaking edge. Most people would say focus on 3. That's why there's a law called the power of 3. And then the third is adapt. Treat this as an opportunity to learn, to step back and say, how will I lead differently? What did I not do as well as I should have in this? And instead of giving myself a go to detention, take it as a chance to reinvent yourself and do the same thing with your business. So for me, I put all that into make sure you're leaving people feeling valued. And to do that, empathize with them, edit and take things off their plate, and be willing to adapt and cut yourself a break as well.
That's great. you know, a lot to think through, a lot to unpack, a lot to plan, but clearly many of the things that we just heard from you are things that we need to think of. This is a time to think, plan, reimagine, redesign, re-energize, reset, right? It does give us that opportunity to take this pandemic actually as a strength as we come out of it in a much more efficient, more leaner, and a more thoughtful manner. So clearly, these discussions are extremely helpful as we move forward. Let me now turn over to Nancy Langton. Nancy has been tracking the questions that are coming in chat, and there were some questions that were submitted beforehand as well. So Nancy, please take it from here, and Brad is of course going to be ready, and I might chip in for some answers as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks Avi and Brad. I'm waiting for my video. There we go. This was a very enthusiastic, informative, and insightful presentation. I'll now read some of the questions that were posted via the chat function during the event. Okay. First question, and I know you mentioned one book, but what, the person who asked this said that you, Brad, you are known for your active reading schedule. What books would you recommend now?
Well, I've been mixing my books up to try to take a little pressure out of the hose. I typically like to read a lot of biography and leadership lessons, and then every once in a while I'll throw something in just to make it a little more light. But the book I'm about to recommend doesn't really tie to the pandemic, but does tie to great leadership. And it's the book called Principles by Ray Dalio, D-A-L-I-O. And Ray was the founder of Bridgewater Securities, one of the very first ones to take the investment community and turn it into algorithms and allow computers to help a financial advisor make the right stock picks. But it's not about that at all. It's about how to write down your principles, your decision principles, your moral code, and then use that as a way to guide your decisions through life, just as he did with his investment principles, where he went back and studied history and wrote down what worked and what didn't, and then turned that into computer code. He has a way of living your life through principles, and I think it's a wonderful book. I just finished it up a couple days ago, and I'd recommend that to anyone.
Great. Another question is, I work in financial services. As a relationship business, so much depends upon reliance of trust and personal integrity. Though we are extensively using video conferencing as a tool, it is not a replacement for sitting at the table with my clients. Any thoughts on how a relationship business will continue to morph?
I think what we're getting right now is a sampling of exactly the points that I believe and our company at Intuit believes is you can never replace human compassion and human interaction. We're naturally social creatures. That's why IBM Watson can crunch the data all day long, and it is much wiser and faster than any doctor in predicting cancer or coming up with a diagnosis. But IBM Watson cannot sit next to a bedside in a hospital and speak with compassion and say, and these are the ways we're going to make your life or this journey better. It is technology plus humans. And so there are ways we're all trying to do that. We're trying to do things like bring video conference plus the technology answers in place. But we are going to need human interaction. So the best way to do it today, and I'm not trying to politicize this, I'm doing this based upon my personal beliefs and based upon the science that I turn to, is as long as COVID's in place without a vaccine, look for ways to social distance, wear a mask, and have that human interaction. And when you can't, use the techniques like we're talking about with video. Post-vaccine, hopefully we're going to get back to a new normal, although at least the scientists that I've had the chance to talk to suggest this will be a seasonal COVID. It's not going to be like smallpox and measles where we take one vaccine and then forever we're protected. It'll probably be like a flu shot every year. But collectively, I think we're going to find a way to get back to interacting. And so in the meantime, I would say do the best you can to communicate empathetically, to engage with your customers through technology, but bring your human voice. And then ultimately know that we'll get back to doing business the way we all prefer to do it, which is with a hug and a handshake.
Okay, another question that's been asked is, what is the state of venture capital in this current economic climate?
The state of venture capital in its current economic climate is actually very positive. There have been a lot of new ideas because necessity is the motherhood of invention. And a lot of vulnerabilities were exposed during this pandemic. different business models, different ways people were trying to serve customers. And so now you have all this money that was sitting there ready to be invested, and they're now looking at those new disruptive ways to survive in an environment like this. Now the opportunity that we have is to get them to look beyond New York, Massachusetts, and California, and to start to look at the amazing entrepreneurial ideas that are coming out of other states like West Virginia. And that's what I've dedicated my life to, along with my wife, Elise, is to shine the light on amazing entrepreneurial ideas coming out of West Virginia.
This is probably a related question, or a question that comes after your response. It says, what are the best ways to recruit remote workers to come and live here? Come live and work here.
You know, there's a lot of work that's being done on this right now, and you'll get a chance to hear more about it as we start to bring it out into the public. But the best experiment to run is one that someone already ran for you and proved it works. It used to be called plagiarism in college. Now it's called benchmarking. And so we are able to go study those that have tried and failed and those that have done it. And the most successful experiment was Tulsa, Oklahoma. I've spoken about this, so I won't take all the time again. It's on the Keith Albee Distinguished Speaker Series. But we've studied that. And what we've learned is you have to have a climate and an environment that welcomes outsiders. You need to have a diversity of restaurants. You need to have a good K through 12 system. You need to have access to broadband. Those are all the things that we'll continue to work on and address as a state. But most importantly, you need to have access to the things they want, which are the outdoors, the mountains, rock climbing, mountain bike climbing, whitewater rapids. And guess what? God gave us those. We have an unfair disadvantage when it comes to the things that this group of employees wants. And now what we have to do is just ensure we're putting the infrastructure around it. And I think we can become the mecca for remote employees. And that's one of the big opportunities that we're focused on.
You know, I just wanted to add a very quick point. And just yesterday, I was looking at a report where home sales is growing across the country, where people are moving away from large cities and building homes in the suburbs or smaller towns. That's already evident in the numbers. And there are so many places like West Virginia, for example, that are gaining in these home sales. Colorado Springs, for example, I believe has the highest demand for new homes right now that people are moving into. But again, you know, it's the same thing. There's nature. It's a good place to live. Great place to settle down and then work as well. So if we have all those things mixed, I think there is going to be a huge demand moving forward. So, I mean, Tulsa did a lot even before the pandemic, but what we are seeing after the pandemic is everybody is already working on those lines and it's happening. So.
Yeah, and Avi, not to continue on this so we can get the next question out, but a lot of states tried this before Tulsa and they failed because they thought it was a tourism campaign, or they thought that it was a marketing campaign. Hey, come and see what you're missing. But when people move into the state and they feel like an outsider and they don't feel like the school is going to be able to give them the kinds of tools they want their kids to have, they don't have the ability to have broadband connectivity, they can't find an Indian restaurant, a Chinese restaurant, a Whole Foods, a plant-based vegan. I mean, it takes a diversity of community planning, or they come in, they stay, and they leave. And so that's the work that we're trying to really take the lessons from, is what do you have to have as supporting infrastructure, in addition to letting people know how beautiful the mountains are, so that they come, they stay, and they help build the next chapter.
Absolutely.
Okay, another question is, do you think businesses have plans for a situation like the COVID-19 crisis? Can you be prepared for something like this?
I don't think you can ever be prepared for the exact crisis, but you can be prepared for a crisis. And this is where scenario planning, or what we call at Marshall design thinking. Design thinking teaches you to envision scenarios. So most businesses will develop not a plan, but a low case, a base case, and a high case. And then what they'll do is they'll say, these are the leading indicators that will let me know if we're tracking more towards a low case, or we're tracking more towards a base or a high, and then they adjust their expenses and their investments depending upon which way the market is unfolding. That's what leaders can do to prepare for a pandemic, is develop a range of scenarios that say, if things got really bad and these were the impacts on my business, what would I do differently and how would I lead differently in that environment? And that's the most important lesson I think we're all going to take out of this, is we need to be much more agile and much more flexible at adjusting on the fly.
Okay, another question says, there was recently a news report that showed the highest job positions were in nursing, technology, and for sales associates. Do you see this continuing? Do you see any other jobs becoming popular?
Yes, I do. First of all, that is true. We need more healthcare professionals, in particular nurses. We need to have the ability for us to collectively know how to help people understand the products and services, which is sales. And there are more to that list. People who are focused on science, technology, engineering, and math, whether it's in healthcare, it's in digital coding, it's in beautiful artistic design to make user interfaces for an iPhone simple and easy to use. Those are all the kinds of skills that are going to continue to develop. And if you go online, you can Google and you'll see those are the kinds of jobs that people are encouraging young men and women to focus on today, whether they choose to go to college or not. I think we need to reinvigorate our VOTEC efforts and let kids graduate high school with skills that are employable. Now, there are also going to be jobs that get disrupted. In fact, they say about 60% of all work will get redefined, and a good portion of it's going to be completely eliminated because of things like artificial intelligence. Anything that's a binary 0 and 1, a debit and a credit, those kinds of challenges, and I'm in that business with small business accounting, we're going to have to reimagine how we add value in that world where a computer will do something faster than us, but we can provide advisory consulting services that make us valuable in addition to the computer. And I don't worry about that as much because if you go back 100 years, a large portion of the United States was agricultural farmers. And now less than a single digit, 2 or 3% are farmers. But look, we were all gainfully employed, or many of us were before the pandemic. We know how to reinvent ourselves and think about what does the world need that I can offer. It may not be what I did yesterday, but I can come up with a way to add value in the future.
Okay. The next question reads, as a small business owner, it has been very difficult to compete with unemployment benefits to recruit employees. Do you have any good advice for enticing employees to return to the workforce when they are making more on unemployment?
Yeah, this was the unintended consequence of good intent. Certainly, many companies, small business and of all sizes, have found this to be true. And I think the only thing I can say to you is celebrate that the employee is doing well. Let them know how much you value them and know that this isn't going to sustain itself for a long period of time. Now, if they can make more in unemployment post the stipends that we're getting from government, then that's a different challenge, which is how can you offer a more competitive environment? It may not always be wages. It may be wages and benefits, or it may be quality of life, or it may be just the dignity that comes with having a job. But think about how you can become competitive in that environment. But know that what's happening right now is happening to many companies. And the good news is people are able to put food on the table, but it's hard for businesses that are trying to get those employees to come back. But that's not going to last forever. And so if you just reach out and let them know how much you care for them, you want them back, they will come back to you because this isn't going to go on for another year.
Okay. Another question is, I live in Palm Beach County, Florida, and have a family farm in West Virginia. Even with a new dish for internet connection, it still is not to the level needed to conduct my business. West Virginia needs to assist businesses to get better connections. This isn't really a question, but I thought you might have some comments on it.
I do. I can tell you without any equivocation at all, if there's only one thing that I believe our home state, and I'm right now, this is not a backdrop. I'm at my home at the Greenbrier. My family still lives in Canova, and my wife and I were able to buy a home here in 2016. And so I come to West Virginia as much as I can to visit them or to stay here. And I will say that if I could say to just one thing we should focus on, we've got to get broadband connectivity in the state. And it has to be not just in the major cities. It needs to be for every home, up every holler, for every individual in the state. Because if we do not do that and make that a priority as a state, we will not effectively compete in the 21st century, in my opinion. Because you cannot remote work here, you cannot distance learn here, you cannot telemedicine here, you cannot do Zoom calls and collaborate, you can't order online, pick up in store, all those things that are going to become even faster and more of our lives coming out of the pandemic. If we don't have that, we can't compete. Now, it's not an easy solve, and I'm excited to know that our state government's working on it. Senator Capito is driving a lot of work here, as is Senator Manchin. A lot of people are leaning in, but we can't let up, and we can't let anything get in our way. If we do not get, my personal opinion, so I apologize for my passion, but if I believe if we don't get broadband connectivity to everyone in the state, we will stay on the bottom of the 50 list, because the entire world going forward will be digitally connected.
Okay, it looks like we have time for one or two more questions. There's one that reads, our largest VC-backed competitors have been laying off up to 20% of their staff. They have cut salaries across the board and others have closed. The pandemic has helped us gain high caliber sales reps who would not have worked for us, and we have increased sales significantly because of this. How can we get attention for venture capitalists to help with this opportunity?
I might not understand the connection to the venture capitalist piece. So that's the question I don't get. But what I am excited about is what you did. You saw that there were incredibly talented and skilled workers that were displaced because of choices their other company or employer had to make. And you showed them a better home. You brought them in and you've given them gainful employment. Venture capitalists, I will say this, many times when I'm back home here in West Virginia, they'll say, when are we going to get VCs to come here? And I will tell you, venture capitalists are, the reason why their last name is capitalist is they follow good ideas. They invest in ideas. They don't care if the ideas are coming from any geography. They just want to invest in the best ideas. So our opportunity is to get our schools focused on entrepreneurism, teach them design thinking, rapid experimentation, help them understand what it takes to start a business. And then there's a lot of work going on between myself, John Chambers, Ray Lane, and others to get the venture capitalists to start to come and look at the ideas. So I promise you this, the money will follow. We just have to produce the great ideas and then get them up in front of the individuals at Marshall University, West Virginia University, or Mike Green and Mountain State Capital. And they will all start to get those ideas enough visibility for venture capital to follow.
Okay, this wraps it up for our 5th HERD 2020 Insight Small Business webinar. A special thanks to you, Brad, for joining us today and being part of this webinar series. There are a lot of thanks to you and Avi on the chat room. We want to announce our next webinar that will be in 3 weeks on September 14th. It is titled Emerging from the Post-Pandemic, a Small Business Health Checkup. It will feature faculty member Monisha Gupta and business professional James Sutherland. Look for your registration email to arrive shortly. Please share the email invite with anyone you know who might benefit from this event. We appreciate everyone's participation today, and always remember, we are Marshall.
Thank you.